to this live episode of Think Business. I'm really looking forward to talking with Kara Goldin, founder and CEO of Hint Inc., best known for its award-winning Hint Water, the leading unsweetened flavored water. Kara, you have such an incredible background and backstory. You've been named one of InStyle's Badass 50, Fast Company's most creative people in business, Fortune's most innovative women in food and drink, and the Entrepreneur of the Year for Northern California. Huffington Post listed you as one of the six disruptors in business alongside Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. You are an active speaker, active writer. You have a new book that just came out in October, Undaunted. So we got a lot to talk about, and I appreciate you taking time to be on the show. But I want to jump in and talk about where we sit today, January 6, 2021. It has been quite a year in 2020. As we sit here in 2021, I want to start by asking you, how has your leadership changed since January of last year?
I think that the thing that I most realized in coming into this year is that you can't really clump a situation into being, the same as yesterday, right?
Yeah.
But in some ways, you can actually learn from history and figure out exactly how to move forward. So I'll never forget those last 2 weeks in March, including flying to New York and kind of hearing from my team in mid-March that they were very uncomfortable going into the office. Yeah. And I live in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And, frankly, I just don't think that it was really in California yet. I mean, we found out later that it kind of was in California, but we didn't really know it. And there was not this awareness that was going on in New York, and it was clearly stressing and straining. And so as a leader, I think actually walking into that situation and feeling it, and then coming back to my team and saying, I think people should be working from home, at least in New York for right now. And let's actually figure out, a little bit more about what's going on. But I think that the other piece of it too was realizing that we realized this in 2008, 2009, that being a little bit paranoid and having enough cash in the bank and doing what you can as a company to constantly be thinking, what if, even when the rest of your colleagues or, in other companies in your industry are saying, wow, that's really crazy. Why wouldn't you save a little money by getting cans or getting bottles from outside of the US versus actually blowing all of your and making your supply chain totally in the US, which ended up to be, was pretty much gold by the time, while the rest of the world was shutting down at different times, we actually were able to really weather the storm quite nicely. So I think that I would say that the leadership lessons in particular were, get in it with your team. And actually, and especially when you don't understand, I think for me, I needed to get on a plane and go fly into it and actually see for myself. And that expanded, frankly, into by the last week in March, when we suddenly knew this new term that we hadn't heard, which was called essential product. Yeah. Being an essential product, you actually have a responsibility as a manufacturer in the US, water, to manufacture 24 hours a day, keep the shelves stocked, all of those things. So while many people were hearing shelter in place, you'll be staying home, maybe their husband or wives were staying home, I was saying to my team, actually, you're going to be working, and here's your N95 masks, and here's your gloves. And at some point I thought, again, I got to go there with them. So I actually went back to what I was doing 15 years ago, which was taking on a route. Yeah. And I had a few people on my team say, really? You're gonna go and take on a route while you're gonna go into Target stores and be merchandising and in the middle of a pandemic? And I said, I am. And part of the reason why I wanted to do that was because I wanted to make sure that I was making the right decision.
Yeah.
Because I did not know what was out there.
Yeah.
And no one did. And I was very, very clear with my team that I had never been through a pandemic. And so I hoped I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't sure. But again, I think showing your realness, maybe your fear a little bit, to saying that I'm going to make this decision for us, and it could evolve as we go on. And what ended up happening too was that things like, just tiny little strategies, including the fact that I started going into stores before 7:00 in the morning. I went to the managers of Target and Whole Foods and some of the others, and I said, hey, would you mind if I come before the doors actually open? And they said, no, that's fine. And I said, great. And I felt more comfortable. And so I went back to my team and I said, hey, there's no people in the store before 7. If you get there, like, I don't know, I feel you guys do whatever you want, but that's my strategy. But so again, coming in with sort of, the strategy, the C-suite, maybe thinking was something that my team valued. And, as it didn't sit there and continue to think, I think our CEO is trying to kill us. I mean, which was truly what a few of them even said to me. And I said, no, not really trying to do that. But I get where you're coming from, but seeing that you're going to go into the battlefield with them, I think is something that really separated the leaders during this time in every single industry.
Absolutely.
From those that, really did not surface in the right way.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, leading by example, I mean, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate, which is one of my favorite things. But it's also leading by example. It's not what you say, it's what you do. So kudos to you for really getting into really scary times and being real. I think too many leaders today are not real, and they've created this kind of image. They have this external brand that doesn't match the internal brand, and that's a big disconnect, I think, today, especially when people are buying into cultures and want to work for cultures of people who are real, care about them. And so kudos. I love that story. I think it's so great. I want to talk to you a little bit about something you said about how you look at history. And, we can look at history and learn a lot. And then we can make some assumptions when we look forwards. Pre-COVID studies were showing that 85% of the jobs that exist in the year 2030 don't exist today. So we're going through this decade of change, and COVID, I think, accelerated a lot of that. And so when you look at just the landscape of business, how do we kind of rewind? How are you rewinding and reverse engineering studies like that to prep for where the world is going tomorrow?
Well, I think clearly, automation, which I touched on a couple of minutes ago. I mean, I think that the more that you can automate anything, I think that it ends up to be better. It ends up that during a pandemic, when you have a product like ours that doesn't have preservatives in it, we've always been maybe a little paranoid about on our lines when we have 8 different plants, and on our lines when, the bottle's getting filled and the extract is going in, we don't have any preservatives. And so what if Joe comes into work that day and he sneezes? And people said, yeah, but it's tiny, just like it. And I said, yeah, maybe, but you don't have anything to kill it. Right? Once it goes in the bottle. And again, we've never had an issue. So you never really know by the time it gets into a 16-ounce bottle exactly what it's going to do. But I just thought, I don't like it. Let's try and figure out if we can get rid of the people in the room. And so that's been our project and our chief operating officer, was running that whole project. And I mean, we were joking for the last few years, almost like, God, why are you so paranoid? I mean, we're down to one person in 2019 in the room. We're like, what are the chances? And he would not stop until it was at zero.
Yeah.
And so by the end of 2019, we had no people in the room. And we were like, clapping, but then we were like, does it really matter? It ended up, it mattered a lot. So by the time March rolled around, we were in such a great position to not shut our factories down at all, like a lot of other factories, because we had actually done this automation. And so I think that would be the number one thing that I would be saying to businesses is there, think about your business and think about, well, first of all, look back in history and figure out like what happened this year. What was hard, right? Instead of saying, forget about 2020, I actually look back in history and say, what happened? What could we do better? Own it, right? Own when you did not like think about it the right way. You weren't prepared, whatever it was, and figure it out. And I think that is the number one thing. Yeah. And then figuring out, is there something here that I can be automating? Is there something else that I should be looking at and doing so that if another pandemic comes along or something else comes along that's scary? And that's really the number one thing that I see. And I think it's across all industries, frankly.
Yeah. I love what you're talking about, the systems, the processes, the automation. I have a question for you, because what you're talking about also is listening to your instincts, listening to that voice, listening to the extra, where I think 99 out of 100 people would have said, yeah, but it's fine the way it is. But something kind of pushed you to kind of keep on going, right? And so what is that extra little something? Because that little something is what separates the great from the exceptional, and I think gets you on the list of being a disruptor along the sides of Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Looking forward, one of my favorite shows is The Men That Built America. It's on the History Channel. Have you seen it?
I have.
Yeah.
I have.
And it starts with Vanderbilt selling his ships, knowing that there's going to be moving to railroads. But there wasn't Uber, there wasn't anything in front of him to direct him. And so he had to make decisions, tough decisions and changes when he didn't know what was in front of him. And so for you didn't know COVID was in front of you, but you listened to your gut and your instincts and you pushed it and your team got on board. And so just kind of infuse some empowerment in people to do more of that.
Yeah, I think it's also infusing this concept that actually I learned in the tech industry in the mid 90s from the little startup that I was working in that was in Steve Jobs' idea that spun out of Apple, but that ideas can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or you're the person sweeping the floors. You look at a situation or a problem and you are brainstorming about it. And that as long as you can participate and you can think, it doesn't really matter. I mean, in this case, if you went to college, if you went to Stanford Business School, whatever, your ideas were actually looked at as, are they, piquing another idea that's going to, satisfy curiosity, whatever, and or spur curiosity, more curiosity. And so I think that's the thing that I think about a lot, is that unfortunately the problem happens, these big ideas don't actually get incubated when, for example, you've got a bunch of people sitting at Coca-Cola trying to come up with innovation. Yeah. Innovation doesn't happen because they're all, the same, right? And they're all talking to each other all day long, and there's no ideas. The ideas come from people who come into an industry when they have questions, and they're just acting as, regular consumers, right? And they're, it's like you asked me, so wait, how does a bottle of Hint actually get produced? you're a smart person, right? But you just haven't lived in it, right? And so that was how I really looked at this problem. What I didn't know was that the being intelligent and then jumping in and asking these questions, you just keep asking more questions. And I mean, I couldn't figure out, for example, why a product didn't have preservatives in it, or I mean, everything that I saw out there had preservatives, and I thought, can't we have a product without preservatives in it? And like, why do we need preservatives? And no one had the answer. And so I said, I don't know. I just don't really want preservatives. So how do we do that? And everybody I talked to, 99% of the people I talked to said, because you can't.
Yeah.
And that to me is not an answer. I don't know. Maybe I like bothered my parents too much, and they would say no. And I'd say, why? I mean, all of those kind of things come along to sort of train you and to think about this. But again, I think if you're so often we opt ourselves out because we think, oh, I don't have experience, when actually it's counter to that, to what is needed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the really the biggest thing that people should be thinking about. It's interesting. I worked at the end of the Obama administration. I was invited into this committee. There were 30 of us that were invited in to focus for 2 years on spurring entrepreneurism throughout the country. And Obama actually picked 30 entrepreneurs from all different walks of life, including me. And we sat in a room, and one of the projects that I was tasked to think about was recycling. And what was it that was missing? And it was interesting because I also worked alongside this guy, Joe, who was living in West Virginia, and he was looking at how to bring former coal miners back into the workforce because the coal mine. And so at first I thought, now what in the world are Joe and I going to be talking about here? Yeah. And then all of a sudden I was just sitting. I mean, he spurred so many ideas and so many thoughts. And that really goes back to this original comment that I made about what I learned in the mid 90s, that I really think that the tech industry really has been probably the most active in kind of thinking about that ideas can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
And that is so central to every single industry, I believe.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right. I love every word that you're saying. I want to shift to women in the boardroom. I want to talk about this year. Studies show that Fortune 500 women equate to 7% last year, and it will get to 8% this year. I have a 14, soon to be 15-year-old daughter that I know is going to do things that are going to change the world. And I want to make sure, and one, thank you for being a pioneer for the daughters of all of us, to have somebody to look up to and know that everything is possible. But how do we get that 8% higher? What can women do and what can men do?
So much to say about this, and so many feelings about it too. So first of all, I think that there's a balance between listening and understanding that there's this issue out there where the number is low, and also just plowing forward. And so in my book, I call them, doubts and doubters. It's like when you start to pick up on, the fact that it's a small percentage and you're smart, you're like, oh, that's really small. So the odds are against me. I get that. But then the more you start to articulate that, you're going to bring those doubters in, right? People are going to think, oh gosh, yeah, there's no way that this is going to be possible. And so I think that instead of focusing, doesn't mean that you can't recognize that the number is there, but move forward. Yeah. And it's your job. And I really do believe this and I feel this and own this every single day, that if I don't show up and I don't go do the things that I need to do, including being part of the Obama administration too. I'm a mother of four, a CEO. Did I have time for it? No. But I said, you know what? I'm going to make time. I'm going to figure this out to do it because it's my responsibility. And that's how I feel about, a lot of what you're talking about there too, is that it is my responsibility. Where I get nervous though, and I have, for Gen Zers that are sitting in my house, is that I think, and I'm of the Gen X generation, I think that we've got this group in between the Gen Xers and the Gen Zers that feels, many of them, that they've been sold a bill of goods, right? And I think that what we've seen in the pandemic is that many of those millennials have left these large cities, have with a lot of debt, have, tons of student loans. They signed up for that tech job that they took a lower salary at to get more stock, and they got screwed in some way, or, they went to a large city and they didn't like that. And so I feel what I get most nervous about is that I think that there are a lot of millennials and particularly women that are potentially opting out in some way. And we haven't done a great job in trying to figure out. Instead, we're saying, oh, they're just millennials, right? Yeah. We haven't tried to figure out, how do I pull them up? Because I don't really think that they're getting pulled up in the right way. I don't have it figured out yet, but I know that, and again, as I've been sheltering in place, I've been having this conversation with my kids that I'm not going to be their manager. And that's why I care about this, that I feel like I still have time, for example, to basically share with millennials that it wasn't easy. If you read my book, you'll see a lot of people have said, look, you had your doubts, you had your failures in there. You talk so honestly about that, and about the stuff that you gave up, about the stuff that you had some success, but then you also said that there was stuff that happened that, you didn't like along the way too. And why don't more people talk about that stuff? Yeah. And I don't think that Gen X does that as well. And I don't think that, I'll go as far as to say that I think that there's more male leaders who talk about that. I don't think the female leaders talk about it in the same way, to say like, that happened and here's what I learned from it, et cetera. But anyway, I think it's an interesting time. And I think that it's as we hopefully come out of this pandemic, I'm hoping to really try and figure that out a little bit more and think on it. But I do worry. I do worry about it.
Well, I love that you're thinking, and I will continue to think as much as I can, if whatever, and talk to my daughter about it as well. So I think it's great. Let's talk about your book a little bit more. Let's talk about the book. So Undaunted. Tell us about the title.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, but I also call myself an accidental author, because I didn't know I was writing a book when I wrote this book. It was my journal that I was writing for the last 4 years. And I was spending a ton of time on planes and in hotel rooms across the country. And instead of turning on the TV, I would start writing. And I would write about, I was doing a ton of public speaking, and sometimes people would ask me questions and I would get kind of stumped about something and think, okay, let me think about a story that would really kind of articulate exactly what the best answer is for this. And so as I started to write this out, about 2.5 years into it, I was talking to a friend of mine who's an author, and I said, how would I bind these notes into some sort of format? I wasn't even calling it a book. I said it so that I could just give it to people so that they could learn from my mistakes and maybe know that it seemed really hard and really confusing, but actually that was a big lesson that I learned in order to do what we're doing today. And she misunderstood me and said, what do you mean, like a publisher or an agent? And I said, maybe, I don't know. I'm just thinking about like actually putting it into some sort of format that it will be easy for people to get. And that's when, I figured out that I've got a book. And I led with doing it because I felt like it would help people, which frankly is probably the last 20 years of my life, in many ways, how I think about things, even if they're hard. I think I always talk about that. I never thought about this as a beverage company when I had seen that by giving up diet soda and drinking water, that it made me tremendously healthier, not just like unobvious, but obvious. I mean, I lost in 2.5 weeks, I lost over 20 pounds. I mean, it was significant. I thought, wait, we have all these people that are on diets all over the world and spending lots of money doing this. And yet it's more about go do this versus stop doing that.
Yeah.
And instead start drinking water. My problem was I was bored with water. I grew up in Arizona. I should have been drinking a ton of water. I never did because I just didn't love the taste.
Yeah.
And so when I figured out for me how to get healthy, then I thought if I could go and launch this beverage, we could not only get people to drink water, but big diseases like type 2 diabetes, which were just cropping up about 15 years ago. I did this because I thought, that's my mark. If I can actually help people get healthy in the world, that's not only pretty damn cool for me, but also for my family. That's the mom. That is the mark that I wanted to make in my life. And so when I started to really think about, that, and I think that was one of the first times that when I was thinking about Hint, where I just really thought about what's my legacy. And I think that was what I thought about this book too, that all the people that I would talk to often on, LinkedIn, or they would hear about my story and write to me, and they maybe loved Hint. Some of them had never tried it. I thought if I could actually just let people know a little bit more that I had no experience in the beverage industry. I had no idea what I was doing. I sat there and followed people in Whole Foods who looked official and said, "Hey, are you a distributor?" And they'd say no. And I'd say, "Oh, well, do you know any?" I mean, I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, that's great.
And meanwhile, like sometimes I was even strolling my cart through the aisles. I mean, it was like a scene. As my husband says, we would have made a lot more money if we actually like started rolling the cameras. I mean, the stuff. But I also thought it was fun.
Yeah.
Right? And it was hysterical. And, I would go to like 15 years ago, I'd be invited to dinner parties and I would tell my friends in tech and they'd be like, "Wait, what are you doing? Oh my God, this is hysterical." And I said, "Yeah, the guys from Pepsi, they threw my product out in the garbage dumpster. Like I saw the guy doing it." Yeah. And he was like, "What did you do?" And I said, I went up to him and I said, "How can you do that?" And he said, "Watch me." And I was just, wait, don't do this. But again, I just thought that I didn't know this world existed.
Yeah.
And it was just bizarre to me, but also it was educational to me in many ways too. And I think like that's the one other thing that I would say too, which is almost a book in and of itself. I just actually launched a piece on this today on LinkedIn about the importance of learning. Yeah. Somewhere along the way, I believe we sort of, maybe college is the last time where we're taught that, you get a job and then you go become a manager. And then maybe some of you will actually become a CEO of a company. And unfortunately, that journey gets less and less about learning and more about teaching.
Yeah.
And so the most unhappy people today are sitting in the highest levels of our companies, often our government, right? Where they're just telling people what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that for me was here. I'm managing a group of 200 people at, my last job prior to Hint at America Online. And that was, I should have been happy and I wasn't happy. And I go back to looking at the fact that I wasn't learning.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a priority to me to learn either. And that's what I was so engaged with when I started learning about the beverage industry. And there were tons of people around me saying, like, really, beverages? Like, you're in tech. I mean, you got stock options, you're making money, like what are you doing?
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm actually enjoying myself every single day. And I make you laugh because you're listening to my horrible stories about my product getting thrown in the dumpster. And it's all, and so anyway, but I think that no matter what industry you're in, and I think, and maybe you're sitting inside of a role today where, you should be happy, but you're not happy. Try and figure out if you're learning. And if you're not learning, that could be one of the top things that needs to change.
That's so well said. A quote that changed my life was success minus fulfillment equals failure. I had a great corporate job. I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. I always wanted to be a business coach. I wanted to write books. I wanted to speak. I wanted to coach companies, coach people. My dad, when I was 18, gave me a set of tapes that's by Brian Tracy, Kara, called The Psychology of Success. And he said, you'll learn more from these people than you will college. And I became obsessed ever since, and that was 30 years ago. And so to me, I agree with you. There is not a day that goes by that I don't do something to kind of grow my learning. And I find that in my coaching business, I'm coaching a lot of the people you're talking about because they don't have anybody to talk to. They're lonely. They're stuck, and they need to get unstuck. So I agree with you. I think learning is absolutely critical, and I wish more companies put it as a top priority and saw it as an investment and not an expense. So I think that's great. I love your story. I love talking to you. You ready for a quick speed round?
Yeah.
All right. Favorite book and why?
Well, the book I'm reading right now that I kind of touched on is called Can't Even. And it's how millennials became the burnout generation.
Oh, wow.
And it's quite good. And I actually interviewed, her name is Ann Peterson. I interviewed her on my podcast, and I dug in a little bit more again, because I feel, can I have impact? Can I change and help? And I think it's important. And so anyway, that's one of the better ones.
That's great. Oh, good. I'm reading a book right now, which I love, Cast, which if you haven't read it, it's
right on my pile.
It's
right
incredible.
there.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
We're doing a family book club with
oh, really?
Yeah, we're all reading it, and then we're talking tomorrow about the book, and it's
that's a good idea.
It should be a must read for everybody. That's
a great idea.
Yeah. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
You can't actually do it if you don't try.
That's a good one. One piece of advice you would give people in college. Excuse me. One piece of advice you would give somebody graduating college today.
Go out and find what you love.
Yeah, I love it.
And can I add just one or two sentences?
Yeah, of course.
I think that one of the chapters in my book that I talk about that a lot of people have been pretty surprised about is that I didn't actually have recruiters come on campus that I wanted to talk to. And so I invested in myself and bought a plane ticket, and I told every single person that came within, I waitressed when I was in college. Any person that would talk to me, I would tell them that I'm going on this tour. And I made the tour a lot bigger, but I told them I was going to LA and San Francisco and Chicago. I knew I wanted to live in a big city. I had over 90 interviews in 1 month, and I had over 60 job offers coming out of college.
That's great.
And people always ask, did you have all these recruiters? Did you, and I said, no, I told everybody, and people want to help. People are actually, they do want to help, and especially people who are older than you. They want to help you. And those entry-level positions are the ones that people are trying to find the great people that want to work.
Yeah, I love it. I love that story. Last question. Define yourself in one word.
Curious.
All right. Kara, tell everybody how they can get your book and any contact information that you want to give away.
Thank you. So it's Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, bookstores everywhere, Amazon, Audible, etc. And of course, you have to have a hint with your bottle of with a bottle of hint with Undaunted, which is our drink. And yeah, I'm all over social media at Kara Goldin, and please stop by, and hopefully we'll get to meet at someday soon.
I appreciate it, Kara. I appreciate you taking time to talk to me. I wish you all the best on your book. And you're a great example of leading by example.
Thank you so much.
And, I think people learn through authenticity of stories and lessons, and you just through how you and I spoke, you just kind of ooze that very freely and generously. So I appreciate that. And I know I probably can speak for many people who probably feel the same way. So I appreciate you being on the show. Thanks. I love your products. I love your wisdom, and I love everything that you shared today. So thank you. Thank you so much to the Think community. Thanks for joining us. Go get some Hint water and go get Undaunted on Amazon.com. All right. Thanks, everybody.